All right, thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. I know that does kind of cut into class time. It's really really important for us though, with an eye toward continually improving and making things better. We have to hear from you. Like we have to hear what we're doing well. We have to hear what we're doing not so well. We need your feedback, and that we do really take continuous improvement around here really seriously, and we have to, right? And I think in no other areas than or in technology more so than in a lot of areas, because we have to change. The pace of change is so quick. So I really, really appreciate that, and I know that I know that's a bit of a hassle, but it's really is so very important, and you'll reap the rewards directly from that kind of thing. Excellent. Okay, so let me just kind of get organized here. What I'd like to do here, first of all. I'd like to pass around this interesting piece of pottery, if I could. You take a look at that, and that's it's a very interesting piece of history, believe it or not. That particular orange dish, and I'll show you why. Here, layout one. We'll open this one up here. Okay, so here is this is a newspaper article from this was back in the mid '80s, so the piece of pottery you're handing around there is called something called Fiestaware, and this came out back in the 30s and the 40s. It was very very popular. Anyway, I remember seeing this article. In fact, this is the very article that my mom dug out of the Toronto Star back in 1985. Here it is. So this article indicated that the dishes, and we were using a whole heap of these dishes. They're very brightly colored. They come in different colors, and they have all kinds of plates and dishes and teacups and mugs and all that kind of thing. Anyway, we're using these as our everyday dishware. We'd inherited them from my aunt, and the family loved them. They were kind of cool. Anyway, this article prompted anyone who owned this dishware to bring it immediately, box it all up, and bring it immediately to the Atomic Energy Board of Canada. So quickly we got all these things together in a box, and we ran them out to the Energy Board of Canada. I remember going with my mom to this, and there was a gentleman in a white lab coat, and he took the dishes out of the box and he ran a Geiger counter over them. And in particular, there wasn't too much reaction from the Geiger counter, but in particular when he ran the counter over the orange dishes, the Geiger counter spiked. And I remember his reaction. He said, "Well, I'll just be taking those." So he gathered up all the orange dishes. What they found was that in order to produce the very bright colors in these dishes, what they were doing, not only were they incorporating a heavy amount of lead into the paint, into the glazes, but also then they were coating these with uranium. So I would happily get up in the morning. I'd pour my Quaker instant oatmeal and put it in the microwave. So I was microwaving uranium. Wow. So anyway, that may explain a few kind of personality quirks I might have these days. We all do these crazier things, but I think this is interesting because here again, and this happens time and again with technology, is at first we may discover something and say, "Oh, this is a really good idea." The uranium, the glaze really brings out the color, right? It gives a kind of almost an iridescent glow, and it protects the dishes from. It makes a very hard glaze. This is great technology, right? Maybe years later we realize, oh, maybe we shouldn't be eating off of radioactive dishware. This is just a replica, so not to worry. I wasn't handing around uranium-235 or anything like that. So you're quite safe, not to worry. This is a reproduction using more benign materials. So and in a lot of ways, this happens with technology, not obviously not just with dishware technology, but in all kinds of technology. This has happened. This kind of thing has happened with web as well, believe it or not. Not that it impacts people's health. Maybe it impacts people's mental health, not their physical well-being. I don't know. Maybe those are one and the same, right? For example, though, so today we're going to talk about layout. We're going to recircle back. We're going to come down looking at the basics of laying out a page. And that's so very important as you guys forge ahead with HTML, JavaScript, CSS, that you learn how to really wrangle those elements and control them, how they're visually presented on a page, right? And ever more important as we move toward more of a mobile focus, we have less and less certainty over what size that page might be. So you have to get very good at this. What we did in the past to control layout was hazardous to our mental health. In a way, we used to use something called tables, right? Because we didn't have reliable CSS controls to build things like columns and rows and things like, we didn't have anything to construct a basic layout grid on the page. So we used tables. But then we started using tables, and then within maybe each row or grid, we wanted to break that up into a number of other columns or rows, so we put tables within tables, and then sometimes within tables. And the code got so horribly and deeply nested and so convoluted. A, it was terrible to maintain. B, it was, if it broke, it was a nightmare. C, it was very heavy. Like from a bandwidth perspective, our front-end code was just like moving a mountain. Like it was just so awful. And also it was inaccessible. Search engines had to munch through all these table rows and table cells and all this thing to actually get to the content. It actually hindered things like search engine optimization, getting your content indexed. Accessibility features like screen readers had a lot of trouble getting through all this code. So it was really terrible. Luckily today we don't use tables anymore, so we don't go through all that. And I lived through the terrible days of layout with tables, and it was awful. And people built terrible monsters, and I built terrible monsters, and we all, kind of feel shame about it now. But we did. That's what we did. That's what we had to work with. So helpfully or thankfully, there's much more modern tools. What we're going to show you today are some of these current layout tools. So how do we really get a good handle on layout using the CSS box model, right? Using things like floats and clears, positioning, fixed and absolute, and all that kind of thing. How do we leverage that to build reliable layouts? But also, how do we appreciate that that's where we may be today in 2017? What about 2018? Right? How are we going to do this? And in what ways are some of the things we're using to build layouts kind of like, maybe not as bad as using uranium on your breakfast dishes, but are they bad? What ways are we using tools that weren't intended to be used the way we do? And how can we kind of clear our minds of this stuff and prepare for the next best way to do it, right? Because there are some great changes coming up. So that'll be our focus today. So obviously we'll theme our lesson around these these radioactive dishware. You can buy all this stuff by the way now, and it's pretty neat.
Is it still radioactive?
No, you have to go to eBay if you want the uranium coated stuff. You have to go to eBay to get that.
Okay, I'll go.
There's actually one crazy. I remember seeing a site. There's this one crazy guy. He has a collection. There's the craziest people out there, right? He has a collection. He's trying to collect an example of every single element on the periodic table, right? And for uranium, he has an orange Fiesta Bowl, but it's funny. He's like this stuff's pretty dangerous. He's like that's hot. Like that's there's a lot of ionizing radiation coming. He puts it in a lead box. It's in a glass lead case. I'm like, wow, I ate off that thing my whole childhood. All right, that's cool. It's all good. So, guess I'm a product of the atomic age, truthfully. So let's take a look. So if we take a look at, if we log ourselves into Blackboard, if you could, and I'll obviously screencast this today. so you can go over this because there's going to be some kind of intricate and some interesting little components to this lecture that you will need to have a pretty good handle on. So let's head over to UI design, and I recognize too I'm a little bit short on time today, so I'll be moving fairly quickly, but we'll take the time that we need. So head into learning modules. We're off to module 4, layout part 1. Turn this off. Awesome. Okay, so if you could pull down the lesson files layout1.zip. I was going to connect up to Azure today and move this stuff up to a web app that we deployed on Azure, but in the interest of time, we'll just do it locally, and maybe we'll do that, connect to Azure next week. You guys are going to be covering connecting to Azure with FTP and also with a code Git or GitHub shortly in Tom's class and Rich's class. So I'm going to be trying to do that to some degree in lockstep with what they're doing, so that you're getting more. You've already connected that way. Okay, so what I'll do is maybe next week we'll do.
GitHub is easy.
Yeah, it's not terribly complicated.
I didn't like it, but it's good now. And they upgraded it.
GitHub's neat, and also like some of the like Atom is built by GitHub. Like if you're worried how well is this going to work with GitHub, well, pretty good. This is from the same team, right? So yeah, we'll. And the interesting thing is, when I built production web tools, we didn't have slick tools like that. Like I've never used GitHub as a way to automatically kind of forward changes to a staging server. I've never done that in production, so it's pretty cool. But what it means is I've got to kind of clear my mind of old way of doing things, right, and say the world has changed. Like this is how we do it now, right? So anyway, it's all good. It's very cool. So right now, actually, I'm learning the entire mean stack, start to finish, and a lot of that means that I have to completely clear my mind of a lot of stuff. There's a lot of garbage in my head that just has to go, right? Because things like asynchronous communication with services and things like that, that means I have to let go of a lot of really some, in a sense, what are now bad practices. So it's all good. I love it. So let's pull down layout1.zip. All this can be done locally anyway, which is fine. Layout 1, and I'll create a new folder for this. Please extract. Windows users, everybody, but for sure Windows users. Whoa, sorry about that. Turn that volume down. That's my trash bin. Great, so let's add this folder layout 1. Let's add this to, and if you're on Windows, you might see a .ds store or an underscore Mac OS 10 directory. You can just delete those. You don't need them. So let's add this to our code editor on the side panel. So add a project folder and add the layout here. And if you could open up index.html. No word wrap for me, eh? No word wrap for me. I find this weird bug with I have to in order to get word wrap to work, I have to resize this the file panel on the side, and then I hit toggle soft wrap, and suddenly it works. I don't know if that's a known issue, and maybe you don't have that. I don't know. Windows users, do you guys have that problem with getting no text wrap, or you're probably, well, I don't have a lot of screen real estate on the projector, so maybe you don't even need to bother. Okay, so this is our HTML. Cool. Is that big enough? Guys at the back? Tamara, that's good. Is that okay? Okay. Cool. So I've broken this down into kind of bite-sized chunks, little steps. First things first, I just gave you a bunch of HTML. Would you trust me with your HTML?
Of course.
Really?
Yes.
That's the politically correct answer. Should you trust me with the HTML?
That's a different question.
That's right. Okay. Remember, I just spent my childhood eating Cheerios out of a dish laced with uranium. Right? Microwaved uranium. Crazy. All right, so point yourself. And you should be good. I actually didn't throw any surprises in there. No Easter eggs, nothing crazy. Okay, unless you should be in good shape. Good, validated, done. Cool. Let's open this up in let's open it up in Chrome because we're going to use the dev tools in Chrome. You can use whatever dev tools you want. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to me what browser you open it up in. Just open it up in one that is reasonably current. So make sure the path to this file you're opening up is the very same path as the file that you have open in your code editor. Okay? There's some pictures of the other dishes. Maybe those are uranium-powered dishes. I don't know. Maybe those are the originals. They sure look bright. Awesome. I'm going to zoom this in just a little bit. Okay. Right on. Cool. All right. Normalize. Always. Right? And again, if you're using something like, if you're using some other kind of CSS framework, do not normalize and then add a framework like Bootstrap. Bootstrap will already have normalize cooked in. Don't double normalize. All you're doing is adding overhead to the CSS engine. So now I've got, so what we do is I've downloaded normalize for you already in the CSS here. So I've already put it, you don't have to go and get it. Simply link it. The relationship still must be style sheet. In my mind, you don't need to set the media attribute on the link when you're normalizing, because we're normalizing possibly for print styles as well as for screen styles. So it's just leave it. Just attach it. Whoops. And you're good. You'll know this is, so save the file, Control S, Command S. When you reload the page, you'll know normalize is functioning. The font will change to a sans serif. I think that the default is Arial on normalization. And you'll also notice that if there was any padding or margin on the body element, it's gone. The text is up against the side of the margin. That's okay. That's good, right? And we don't have to deal with that. We don't have to clean it up. Cool. So if you've got that far, you're in good shape. We've set everything up the way we want. Notice we've taken care of the viewport or for mobile devices not being honest about their capabilities. So setting the width equal to the device width. So when the mobile screen renders this, it's not going to pretend it's a full desktop, right? That's some crazy pixel resolution. It's going to say, look, if I only have 300 or 460 CSS pixels of width, then that's how I'm going to render the page. And that's really, really important that we do that. Awesome. Okay, so something that I think is important for you guys to know about, because you're going to be dealing with legacy code, not because you're going to be, when you build new stuff, I think we can build with much more forward-looking code, particularly now. I mean, you guys are, this is spring, winter, this is winter 2017, so you'll be finished in the spring of 18. So I expect some of these issues will go away. So some of the things, but you're going to need to know why they're here. So for example, there are older IE browsers, right, that do not understand HTML5, right? So for example, things like cool stuff like the main element, it will not render, right? They will not render. You will not have access. You'll not be able to use CSS to manipulate the box model of the main element in IE8 because it doesn't get what a main element is, right? So what we have to do is actually shim up these old browsers. Anyone know what a shim is? Ever heard of a shim? Right? It's a little, like oftentimes a wooden wedge that you use to just kind of square things up. Like if you have a door frame, it's kind of a little bit, you get a little shim, you just tap it in, and it kind of, right? So that's the idea is with HTML, with older IE browsers, and I'm talking about like IE 9 or below, some of those HTML5 elements will not render, and you won't be able to control them with CSS properly, right? This is going away quickly, and in fact, even some of these conditional comments, actually, as of IE10, I think they're disregarding conditional comments, and they're just treating them as regular HTML comments. So as we move into IE11 and Edge, we can begin to forget about this stuff, which is awesome, which is really cool. I'm like, wow. Like technology does get better. It gets easier and simpler and more powerful. It actually does get better, right? And we can certainly see this in web stuff. So, but if you are dealing with a situation where your stats, you go into your browser stats, you dig those up and you look at drill down into, okay, what about our IE users? What percentage of our visitors are, you might be surprised. If you see 5% of people still using IE8, you got to shim it up, right? Maybe that's not the case. Maybe your usage is 0.01%, right? In which case, well, I don't know. Do you bother? I don't know. If you build things properly, a lot of times they'll still get it'll fail fairly gracefully, in a sense that they'll still get a very usable version of the page. It just might not be all that you've hoped for. So if we look up, if you add a tab here and we talk, just type in HTML5 shiv. I want to see if we get, where's Paul Irish? Paul Irish, so here it is. Here's the story here on the history. I'd like you to, it's a short article. I really would like you to read that. You don't have to worry about the comments, but I'd like you to spin through that article. It kind of gives you a background on what happened with HTML5 and why we have to be cognizant of that moving forward. So, but the good thing is that if you're stuck supporting IE 9, 8, 7, hopefully you're not stuck supporting 6. I don't know what you'd be doing if you did that, but who knows. You do need to run a bit of, what we do here is we run a bit of JavaScript to shim, or they called it a shiv. I think there's some sort of story behind that. So that the rendering engine Trident in IE recognizes things like main and section, renders them as block, and then you have access to all the box model controls. So how we do this is we say, okay, we don't want to pull in this piece of JavaScript here, So this is from a content distribution network, HTML5 shiv.js. We don't want to pull that in for anything other than decrepit versions of IE. We just don't want to run that on a browser, on a modern browser. It doesn't. There's no benefit whatsoever. In fact, it might even cause some problems. So what we'll do here, we'll use an IE, a conditional comment. So it starts out with a regular HTML comment. Oh, no space, square bracket, and then we say if LTE less than equal to capital IE space 9. So if it's less than or equal to IE 9, then we put an angle bracket. So browsers 9 or lower will pull in that, they'll run that script element. Pull that in from the content, the hosted version of that from Cloudflare, and it will run. And everything else, we'll just ignore this as a simple HTML, so we need to end the if statement here. So it looks like this. Square bracket, end if, and then close out the comment. Make sure the syntax must be perfect, or it will not work. Like I'm talking the space here. You don't put a space here, no go. It's that specific. Okay. This will have no bearing whatsoever on your page. Obviously, I'm using Chrome on OS 10. It just that's an HTML comment. You can fire that up on IE. You can go into the dev tools with F12, hit emulate backwards, and you'll see that the layout will change. But once you bolt this on, it will render. Those elements will render as block, which is the main element, the section element, the aside element. And in all fairness, I mean, we could say, well, that's not cool. Why did IE 9 or older? What's the problem with them? There was nothing. There's no problem. Those rendering engines were built before we really had settled out, before the dust had settled on what HTML5 should look like. It is what it is. So cool. Step 3. So we've shimmed up or shivved older versions of IE so that we can now confidently move ahead with HTML5 rendering with CSS. Okay, it's cool, and I don't know. I would think maybe this time next year I might not even have this. I might not even bother to put this up here, which is a good thing, right? But you guys are going to see this stuff, and you're going to be like, what's this for, right? And also, you might look at this and go, I don't need this. My user base, my user statistics are showing me that I have effectively nobody browsing this website that is on IE 9 or less. So then if it's all IE 10 or greater, forget it. You're wasting your bandwidth, right? All right, that's cool. So now I've got, here on line 15, we've linked to some web fonts. So what I've done is I've used Font Squirrel. And we'll see this a little later on. This is pretty cool. I've used Font Squirrel to pull down some fonts and then upload them into a number of different, you'll be able to read this on your own screen a little bit better. So what it's done is there's some social icons, fonts. So instead of doing these in bitmaps, I decided to use these as a font at the bottom of the document. And we'll play with this. There's going to be some social icon buttons. I'm using these as vector images. They're actually a font rather than an image. But what happens is these were available free for commercial and non-commercial use. I uploaded this. I think they were in TrueType font in Font Squirrel, and it gave me the whole kit. So it output them in TrueType, Web Open Font Format, Scalable Vector Graphics for iOS, Web Open Font Format 2, WAF2, and all the different formats. So this will render reliably on here. So if we look at the style sheet inside the fonts folder, right? So we use that font face. Thank you to Font Squirrel, which is a really cool utility. all I need to do in my CS, once I've bolted on the source for these different embedded open type for, there's an IE problem there, web open font format version 2, web open font format version 1, true type text format, and then SVG for iOS devices. So this is actually, the way they've engineered the order of these things is so that these user agents will fall back. There's method to this madness, so they fall back or they fail until the user agent hits the one it supports, and then it pulls in that one, and then you can refer to that simply with social ICO regular in your CSS. So yeah, you could figure this out on your own, but I would encourage you, if you're using a web font, to use a utility that would output this for you, right? And then because they're constantly looking at how do we best create this stack at font phase to best support all the devices, so you have the best chance of that font rendering. Anyway, font scroll, great service, love it. Okay, so now we've got some special fonts that we might need in the layout. Let's link to the layout CSS. So I've already got a kind of a half-baked layout.css file that I want you to attach. Save that. That shouldn't do anything until we start wrangling some CSS. So then from step 4, we'll move to step 5, which is inside the layout.css file here. Excellent. Cool. Am I getting my text rendering, my word wrap is not working. There you go. Okay, we'll talk about these links and this code here. I want you to ignore this. Notice though, however, line 1, set your character encoding in your CSS. It's a good idea. In my mind, that's every bit as important as setting your character encoding in your HTML. I think you should be setting it in your JavaScript too. JavaScript, you may be outputting text-based content, which are character glyphs. That should probably be controlled, right? Or at least set. Otherwise, you're hoping for crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. That the user agent says, yeah, this is Unicode. You know, it might say, no, this is Western Latin 8859-1, and then you're like, get weird characters on your page like tofu, you know, little squares. No good. So set your character encoding in your CSS. Cool. Step 5, base typography. Like we talked about in our CSS, in our typography lesson, set it and forget it. Use inheritance, right? If there's a base font you want to use, set it once on the HTML or the body element. Let that kind of cascade through your document, right? So very often I see CSS riddled with people setting even the font family to the same value on their H1, their H2, their paragraph element. I'm like, what a waste of bandwidth. Just set it once. It will inherit. That's the beautiful thing about inheritance, right? Don't repeat yourself. Dry. So we'll set. What we'll do is we'll use the font shorthand. So we'll say font. And we'll say, okay, we want the font size to be 150%. So we're going to make this slightly larger. Slash, our line height can be a factor, and I want this to be 1.4. Okay, so that's increasing the base font rendering by 1.5 times, and setting all the line height, and this will inherit, right? So that we have, we're opening that letting up. So it's more readable, particularly for not a huge deal for display fonts, for like headings and things, but certainly a big deal for body copy. So set that, slash, and then we're going to say, let's set this to Tahoma. Failing that, we'll set this to, I don't know, Arial. Failing that, we'll go back to any old sans serif. Save that. You'll know that your font, your CSS is attached when you reload the page. We should get Tahoma, right? And the font size should boost itself appropriately. Notice that this image is hard up against, whoops, slammed up against the side of the page. Right? Cool. Awesome. Step 6, outline all elements to be arranged in the layout. So here's where you want to be aware of the difference between setting a border on something and setting an outline. So if we think of the box model, right? I'll do this on the screen. So we have any element that is display block, right? We have the content. Right? Then we have, so this is the, you set the width, right? It's sized according to the content, right? We set the height, it's according to the content. This is called content box sizing. This is the default, this is the way that rendering works by default. So inside, so that's the content, right? You can imagine that as a box, kind of. Inside here, we have the padding. Then outside here, this stuff here, we have the border. And then any of the space around here is the margin, right? Okay. So that's by default how it works. For anything that is display block by default, right? Things that are inline or flow content, like the emphasis element, don't have these controls. You can't set the width arbitrarily. It has to be width auto so that words can sit on either side of it, right? We can't have it forcing a new line, things like that, right? So emphasis, the Q element is inline. It doesn't have these controls, but you can set any element to display block, and we'll have all these controls sit on its own line, and you can control all these properties. That's fine. So, but when we think about this, I want to be able to see this on the screen when I'm doing a layout. Or it's all imaginary, right? It's all like, it's very, I don't know what's going on. So that really, I'd love to be able to, for every element, particularly our sectioning elements that allow us that grid, that framework for the page, I want to be able to see this. Now, if I turn on the border for my element, the computed width for this element, say this is 5 pixels, say this is 20 pixels, say this is, I don't know, 50 pixels, the computed width of this, you're going to add all these things up. It's additive, right? So the width of the border is factored into the computed width of the element. That will affect my layout. Right? So, and particularly when we're dealing with layouts using floats or positioning or inline block, the width of things are very touchy. Because if we have a container that's, say, only 900 pixels wide, as soon as we add on a little bit of padding or border, those content, they may run out of room and we may break the layout. So it's really important that we understand border. There's another property here called outline. It's a lesser known property. And the outline property is actually a line that is superimposed on top of the border, right down the middle. It's usually not visible by default. But I can add an outline of 10 pixels and it will not affect the computed width or height of the element because it's painted on top. right? If you have, when you hit focus, you hit tab through something, or you click on something, you see a dotted line around it. That's the outline property, right? Browsers use this for sometimes to render focus, the focus event. So I can use the outline property rather than the border when I'm doing layout to see how things are behaving. As soon as I use border, I have to add that into my mathematics, and it gets really complicated. The only problem with border, using outline, is if I have adjacent elements that are up against one another, I'm not going to see these two lines side by each. I'm going to see them overlap. Okay, that's the only challenge with outline. But anyway, we'll have some fun with it. So let's set our div. If we look at the markup, I'll collapse these sections. So here we have the body. Inside the body is a div ID container. I'm hoping one day to really just kind of get rid of the div ID container and use the body element reliably. I think we're there, but you'll see this in a lot of web apps in terms of their markup. So we'll have the div ID container. Inside that we have a header. We have a main. The main contains a section and an aside. And we have a footer. So what I want to do is I want to add boxes using the outline property, different colored boxes for each of these sectioning elements. So I can start to put the grid together. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So div ID container, we'll say outline, and I'm going to say 3px solid yellow. There's the div ID content. You'll see it actually, the sides of that element are not visible. They're rendered just outside here. They're there. You can only see the top and bottom. Okay? So that's the div ID container. Let's also move on now to the header. And we'll change this to orange. Give it a different, make sure it's a bright color you can't miss. Let's give the main a red. The section we'll do cyan. Main section. And let's do the aside element. Cyan, lime green. And hot pink for the footer. There. As soon as you do that, you see all of our, now we've got a clear idea of where all those boxes are on the page. I'll get rid of this here. Cool. Right on. So now we're set up to wrangle our layout under control. I've normalized everything, so I've got rid of any of that extraneous padding, margins, width, all that's kind of, we know it's consistent. It's going to render those properties that there are sensible defaults are the same everywhere. I've like primer on the wall. I've set the stage, right? I've got my base typography set on the HTML or the body element. I don't have to change that unless there's a change to the fonts or any of those. I've also taken care of, because I'm using HTML sectioning elements, I've dealt with older versions of IE 9 and older, so they will render properly using a JavaScript piece of JavaScript. I've made sure that devices are honest about how big they are, how many CSS pixels they have across the screen. That's good for tablets and phones and watches, right? Google's coming out with a new wearables 2, I think it is, shortly. So as you know, we haven't seen a lot of uptake in terms of wearables, but it's coming, right? And you guys will be, possibly working on things like that. So this matters. It matters more and more. So we're good to go. We've got any dependencies in terms of if we have special fonts that we're using at font face, they're bolted on. That's ready to go, and we have our layout properly moved into an external file. So notice I've done all this stuff before I bolt on the layout. You don't normalize after you apply the custom styles, right? You could get some weird stuff going on, right? You don't. That's like priming the wall after you put the base color on. It's probably not. There is a certain order of things that you want to use. So we're all set up. We're ready to go. Okay, that's great. Well, why don't we take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll start putting this grid together, and tearing it apart, and putting it together, and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Can you leave it for a second?
Yeah. Test, test, test. Are we rolling? All right. Go. Okay, so let's, what we're just going to do is we're going to keep things really, really simple for now as we work with the grid. So I'm going to use a fixed width grid system. So I'm going to use CSS pixels as the grid. We can translate this into a liquid layout or an elastic layout using either typographic units, or you can use percentages, relative units. But we'll start with, just to keep the math simple, we'll start with a fixed width. And a lot of people will say, well, fixed width layouts, there's not much point in dealing with that anymore. And I would hesitate to say that's categorically untrue. As the more we get into different devices now with the Internet of Things, a lot of elements, there's going to be a lot of benefit in using fixed width layouts when you know exactly what you're building the interface for. If it's a watch or a thermostat or a front end for a utility for a car or a radio or something like that, a lot of times we're kind of you're going to have, to some degree, less capable displays than what you've got in front of you. So, okay, so let's head over here to step 7. So our div container, we're going to set the width and the margins on this page container. So we're going to set the width to a very conservative 900 pixels. Okay. Then we're going to automatically center this by setting a margin using margin shorthand. So our top and bottom margins will be 0, and the left and right will both be automatic, effectively centering out the container. Save that. We'll see the result on the page. Right. So now we've controlled. So remember, this is the yellow. This is the yellow. Keep in mind what box you're controlling. This is the yellow box on the page. Right? It's now 900 pixels wide, and margin is 0 auto. Now, so what I want you to do over here on the browser, I want you to open up the dev tools. If you're in Chrome, simply go to the right-click anywhere on the page, off a link, and hit inspect. And then what you can do is over here in the, you can see the DOM up here. I want you to crack open this here until we see the div ID container. Right? So I'm running out of screen real estate. I don't quite have this, probably the same amount that you do, but you can also see what I want you to pay attention to is this here, the box model. So if you've got the div ID container, you can click on that here. And then you can see the rendering here. So this is content box rendering. So this thing is 900 pixels wide, like we specified. But the blue part is the content, right? There's no padding. There's no border. There's no margin top and bottom. And the left is auto-computed based on width of the screen, split in two, the difference. So this is your best friend right here. This is awesome. Can anyone see something confusing when we think about, we set the top and margin, top and bottom to 0, and the left and right to auto? Can anyone find anything on the screen that doesn't make sense?
Does it seem like the
That's weird. And when you mouse over it, you get the color coding that indicates that corresponds to this model here. Weirdness. It's not doing what I asked it to do. Welcome to CSS. Okay. What this is, in fact, this is something called an escaping margin. We can fix this. I'll show you how later. But what I want you to take a look at, inside here is an H1 inside the header. The H1 by default is set up with a margin top and a margin bottom, even with normalize. So watch this. I'm going to drill down in here, into the div, into the header. There's your mystery margin. So even though the H1 is contained inside the header, that margin extends beyond its parent container and actually forces the whole thing. It says, no, we must have a margin top on our H1. It escapes its container. We can take care of that, control all that, but just be aware when you see that kind of weird behavior, when you set margin 0 on something, and you see an inexplicable amount of space, drill down through the DOM here, look at this, right? I'll click on if I click on the H1, indeed the H1 has a margin of 32.160 CSS pixels. There's your problem, right? So we're going to leave this friendly tool up here as we do our layout, which is very, very helpful. Cool. Step 8 is we're going to bust step 8 into a number of different sub-steps. So first thing I want to do now, the next thing I want to do is I want to take so inside we have the yellow box is the container, the orange box is the header, the red box is the main element. The main element has two children, the section and the aside. So what I want to do, so here's this is going to be, we'll call that our container. Okay, here's the header. I want the section here. I want the aside over here. And I want the footer over here. Okay, so I want the main element, which is actually here. Okay. I want the main element to have two columns. And those columns will be formed by the section and the aside. And then we'll have the footer and the header. Okay, a very simple grid-based layout. But using, instead of I'm not just going to pepper my code with a bunch of useless divs just for the purposes of putting together a grid. That's not much beyond what we used to do with tables, right? And a lot of code you're going to see, you're going to crack open the markup and it's be like div, 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 div. And you're like, and they've got all these crazy classes on them. All that's there is for layout. And in a sense, it's not that much better than we've just basically said this problem we had with tables. We've just swapped one for the other. Now we have a problem with divs, right? I like to call that divitis, right? Inflammation of the div element, right? Forget it. You don't need that many divs. You can really pare that code down. And a lot of times people misunderstand that when you go to a tutorial and you see it may be an excellent tutorial and they'll provide you graciously with some code, they use a pile of divs. They don't do that intending you to grab those divs and throw them into your app. They do that because they can't make any assumptions as to your markup. They have to be generic, and then you change those divs out for something more semantically meaningful and structural, right? So a lot of this problem with excessive divs being used for layout purposes is just people taking, starting with great tutorials and example code, but then not making it semantic, So we don't need, and you'll notice I've only got one div in this entire layout. Right? So I don't want to see a heap of nested generic elements like div simply for creating layout purposes. I'm going to give you the gears if I see that. I'm going to say first you're creating bloatware, and second of all, where's the semantic value in this code? It's harder to read, it's harder to maintain, all these things. Okay, so we'll do that. So we're going to use this will be our header in here, right? This will be our section. and this will be our side, and this will be our footer. So that's the goal, right? In terms of our grid. So off we go. So what we're going to do then is step 8A. We're going to set the width for the section and the aside columns. So the section element will set the width. Our container is 900 px. We're going to set this to 600 px. Then we're going to go down to the aside here. And we're going to set the width here to 300 px. Okay. This is where these boxes really become quite handy, right? So our main element, which is the red one, it'd be nice to see this here, but this red box goes all the way down here, and it contains the blue box and the green box, right? Okay. So these are they're block level elements, right? They demand their own line. No matter what the width is, they're going to force a carriage return or a line feed, right? So this is just behaving the way the spec is written. There's nothing, this shouldn't automatically go up here because it fits. You have to force that. You have to make that happen. But you have to make sure that everything is actually mathematically going to fit together. Okay, so that should be what you see. We'll deal with these escaping margins again. But we can verify this. We can go into the main element. You know, if you're not sure if that's what you're seeing, just mouse over it in the DOM. Right? You can click on it and you can even see. Right? And let's take a look. We'll crack open the main element. There's our section. And there's our side. Cool. So we need to get these. So that's cool. 8A. 8B. Float the columns right and left. Okay, so let's take the section element and we'll float it to the left. Whoops. Semicolon. Notice any crazy changes? So what's happened now is the top of this green element, the following element, the aside, now lines up here. And it does that, it goes all the way up here because it needs to allow this content to reflow up here. It doesn't quite fit in there. Okay? So what I'll also do is I'll float that one left as well. So I'll go over to the aside element here. Float this one left. Then it slides up, right? And then following content, the content in the footer now slides up here because it's following that, and it can fit, this content itself actually can fit in this space, so it reflows up there. We can float this right. It'll do the same thing. This is called an opposing floats. So this one left, this one floats right. That'll achieve the same thing. We can float, if we float the section also to the right, I can swap them around. So even though the source order has this one, the section first before the aside, if this is floating right, it goes to the right margin, and then subsequent content is then allowed to reflow to the space now opened up on the left. Okay, so source order in your code doesn't necessarily have to affect rendering the position where it's rendered on the screen, and that's a very important thing to understand, particularly as we move into things like Flexbox, CSS Grid, and other less limited methods of moving things around on the page. So that's cool. Let's put these back to, let's put the section back to a left float and a left float here as well on the side. Cool. Okay, let's break the float intentionally. Okay, so what I'm going to do here with the section element, I'm going to say, I'll have to refresh this so we have the left. There's on the left. So what if I wanted a little bit of breathing room here? I don't want this text jamming up against this column here, right? I need to open this up a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of padding inside this section on the right-hand side. So think of the box model, right? The padding is inside here, but outside of the border. Always keep this piece in mind. So I'm going to add a padding right on the section to form that gutter from a typography perspective. Gutters, right? Not padding. I wish the typographers, I wish the graphic designers got in at the start of CSS and all that nomenclature was the same. It's like, that's such a big miss, but that's all right. Maybe we'll fix that later. I don't know. Okay, so let's take a look at the section. And we're going to say padding right. And I don't know, let's just say 25 pixels, right? So now, that's fine. Kaboom. Wow. Now the whole thing comes apart like a house of cards. Right? Floats are using floats and clears are very unstable. Right? They're unstable for a number of reasons. Not the least one of them is because by default, when we set our height and width, these are based on the content, not on the other dimensions of said box. Right? So that means that now I have the fully rendered width of this is 625, right? Not leaving enough for the next one, so it just goes down to where it should. And then, yeah, the footer flows up here. Why not? Because this is float left, so the footer content goes all the way up here. But actually, this is float left too, so I can actually move the footer content all the way up here. It seems unintuitive, but that's the way the spec was written. So that's very weird, but it is what it is. That's fine. So I can do a number of things to fix this. I could reduce this to accommodate for this padding now and fix that. That's fine. But I want you to imagine the scenario where you have maybe other elements in there, right? Maybe you have 3 or 4 columns, multiple rows in a layout. What if you have a very, very complicated grid situation and you need to adjust parts of that part, maybe adjust those gutters, maybe based on, we'll change it a little bit if the person takes their tablet and goes to landscape from portrait. Now the mathematics becomes very cumbersome and it becomes incumbent on you to figure it out, right? Now we're not letting the computer do that thinking for us. So one of the ways we could sidestep this issue, let's put this back. Let's leave it broken. Okay, we'll leave this at 600, this at 25. So now 625 plus 300 is more than the container, which is 900. We have a broken float. Fair enough. Okay. Now what we're going to do is at the very top here, there's a great article written many years ago, actually 2012, on why the heck do we do this? This is completely impractical for designing layouts using positioning and floats and clears and all this kind of stuff. This is very, very difficult to work with because of the additive nature of figuring out the size of things. So what if we said, no, let's change the width and the height and size it based on the border instead? Wouldn't this be a lot more predictable? Wouldn't this be a lot more predictable? Well, you can set this, and there was it used to be that such that, and I can't remember which one it was, back in the days of Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer, when they were the kind of the two, that was basically all you had in terms of choices effectively. They disagreed. One of them did box sizing, one of them did border sizing, right? So what we can do is we can force the issue, and we can say, okay, so go ahead and uncomment this line here. And if you want to just size, if you're in Atom or anything, just hit Control right-leaning slash and it will uncomment the box, or just get rid of the comment delimiters. So what this effectively does, thanks to Paul Irish, and there's another, they figured this out actually a long time ago, but then there was an update to this based on some of the evolution of some of the browsers, the way they rendered CSS. So also there's an article at it's very short at CSS Tricks. This is how we kind of get this working everywhere, right? So what happens is we set on the root node, we set box sizing to border box. Then when we set the height and width, it controls this. That's great, but then we need to force the entire DOM to render that way, right? Because this doesn't inherit naturally. So that means we'd have to go through and list all of the different elements in the DOM, paragraphs, headings 1 through 6, block quotes, all the box level. Or what we can do is we can say wildcard, that means all elements, comma, and then any elements that are set before or after. So if we're using generated content with CSS, also nab those too, and make sure that they all inherit that. Now our entire box model changes for the whole system. So that means this is great. So watch this, save this, and if I refresh the page, suddenly this works. Right? My math suddenly becomes very simple. And the nice thing is, now if I say, man, I'd like to increase this margin here a little bit, it's just a little tight. Off I go. I can go down to, that's on the section. So let's just set the padding right and say, let's double that to 50. And I only have to change that in one spot. Way easier. Way easier. So you're going to see a lot of, so make sure you uncomment this code up here. And you want to put that up near the top. You're going to use border box sizing. You want to put that up the top. You don't have to. I'm not by any means forcing you to change the default rendering model for the box model in your browsers. I'm just saying this is very popular to do this, and a lot of CSS frameworks actually use this because of its simplicity, right? So this is up to you. I would say, yeah, this is a little easier. I like it, and it's good to get familiar with it. So there we go. So that's that makes things it makes it harder, particularly if you're using something a little bit unstable like a float. That makes it harder to break things by changing padding and all kinds of crazy.
So if you put like a 5-pixel border around it, is that included in the width?
No. So say right now this section is an outline. Say I change this to a border. Okay. Now I've added. Oh, it lies. No, because the border is included. It's to the outside of the border.
Okay.
Yeah. That's right. you have to really change gears, right? So it's the outside of the border. So the width of the border, whatever width I set, you can then add the border and it will encroach on the inner part of the box as well as the padding. And then this will be whatever it needs. It'll rewrap the content wherever it would need to flow. It's because it's liquid, it's flow content, right? So yeah, so you can go ahead and if we change the border there, we can also change the border here on the aside. change the border on the footer, the aside, change it from an outline to a border on the main, to a border on the header, and a border on the container. Save that. Oh, I did break. Somehow I broke something. Oh, I wonder if this didn't give us quite enough space. Maybe because it encroached. Yeah. No, that's not it. Interesting. Okay, it was the outline. Yeah, because so the main element, actually that would mean that you didn't have 900 pixels inside, you had 900 minus 6. So that's why they broke again, because we had this in here. So with the border box, it encroached 3 pixels here and 3 pixels here. Anyway, so there you go. So I'll put these all back to outline, just to keep things simple. Outline, outline, outline. There we go. Okay, cool. So border box sizing, that's all right. Break the float. 8C, 8D. Where did I stash 8D? 8D. Clear the footer. Okay, so let's clear the footer here. And because we can say, let's look to the left margin, right? If I know that everything above this will be, this footer here, if I know that everything above it is floated left, then don't render this content until we're clear of floated elements on the left. Right? If all of the preceding elements are floated right, then I'm waiting for elements to be clear on the right-hand side if they're float right. Right? If I am not sure, and I want rock-solid code, maybe you're building a CMS, maybe you're working with a theme for a CMS, and maybe part of that user interface allows users to move content around left and right. So maybe you better hedge your bet and say, I don't know, but I know there's going to be floated stuff above. I need to clear all of it. Just clear both. That doesn't do any harm, particularly with something like a footer. And that'll have the same effect. What I do want you to pay attention to is the fact that the main element is actually collapsed. It's flat. So this here, even though it contains these two things here, it collapses, right? It collapses because it needs to collapse so that the footer can wrap up here if need be, because they're both floated. So what happens, and this is actually part of the spec, if you have a box and all the children inside it are floated left or right, the parent collapses to height 0 to allow subsequent content below to reflow. That's the way the spec's written. It's weird. It's kind of unintuitive. It's a bit of a mind bender, right? So if an element has all of its children are floated, it will collapse to height 0. That's why I have to then say to the footer, no, clear, wait till we're clear of the section or the aside that are floated before we render. Another way to clear a float is to prevent this parent element, the main, from collapsing to height 0 in the first place. And if you walk away, you're like, that's pretty abstract, and you're kind of scratching your head, that's okay. CSS has been making people scratch their heads for years. So, but this is just the way the spec is written sometimes, right? So what I can do here, step 8D, is it E? Where did I put AE. Okay, so what I can do is like let's go into the footer, and I'm going to comment out the clear. So let's not clear the footer. Let's not clear the footer. So comment that out, and when I reload the code, there's the footer, not cleared, right? It's reflowing up here. What I can do, if I force this red box to now encapsulate properly its children, that the height of that red box should extend all the way down to the bottom of this blue aside or section element here, forcing the footer to then render below. Okay? So how do I set this height on the main to auto again? What I do is the weirdest thing. I go into the main element, and I set that also to float left. It's called setting a float to clear a float. So for the way the CSS spec is written, if a parent is floated and it has floated children, it will reduce. The height will now be auto. So if I save that and I refresh the page, you'll see there the red box, which is the main, now extends to encapsulate its floated children, and then the footer is left with no other choice but to render after the main box. I'm sorry, I didn't write the spec. Set a float to clear a float. Floats are weird. They're just weird, and kind of like uranium on a dish. Really, perhaps not a great idea for layout, right? But up until this point, we actually haven't had too many tools that do this job very well. To this point, I want to show you a little bit of hope, though. And we'll be talking about CSS Grid in the second CSS course, CSS Part 2, Advanced Web UI Design. But there actually is a way to do this very reliably. Okay? Yes. And it's much less mind-bending than floats and clears. Okay? It's called CSS Grid. The trouble with CSS Grid, up until now, I've actually never taught it in a class because I can't. I can't teach you. It's not production ready. So if you go to caniuse.com and we type out CSS Grid, there's the state of things. But I want to show you the hope. Right? It's coming, so we're going to learn it. We're going to learn it in the fall, right? Now's the time to get familiar with it because it's coming. You can't use it in production today, but I want you guys to be ready for that wave when it suddenly, browsers are updating much more quickly now. Your browser, you don't have to wait for big system updates to get a fresh browser. People's browsers are updating while they're sleeping at night on their phones and everything like that. So it's really cool. So we're going to be able to do this kind of grid-based layout a lot easier, right?
Well, there's like some way to compete with Bootstrap and things like that.
Something to compete with?
Yeah, or not.
Bootstrap will use this to power the layout. So you'll be adding classes to your elements to construct rows and columns and to basically put the framework for that visual grid.
So Bootstrap is kind of ready for this?
Bootstrap is not quite ready for this. No. Bootstrap uses the simpler, but so there's something called Flexbox. You may have heard of this. So Flexbox is kind of a way of laying out things in columns and rows. It isn't quite as comprehensive as grid. This will be used in combination with the grid. So this is, if you go to Bootstrap version 4, you can now use Flexbox versus floats and clears to lay out a page much more reliably. Okay, but even Flexbox Yeah, see Flexbox, we're in good shape. And we're going to talk about Flexbox next week. Okay, so this is kind of the precursor. Flexbox is kind of some smaller, more kind of specific tools for laying out smaller components of the page. Grid is like for full layouts, right? And the support will be there. So it's very exciting. It's really, really cool. And I'm so glad to be, to some extent, to be done with floats and clears. But we need to understand what floats and clears do, how they work. They'll still have their purpose for smaller pieces of content, for little widgets that you might deal with. You know, sometimes you don't need a CSS grid that's hitting a fly with a sledgehammer. Sometimes just floating something off to the right will just do the trick and you're done, right? So, so we're getting there. Yeah, the state of the art is coming very quickly. So it's very exciting. Set a float to clear a float. Crazy stuff. All right, E8F. So let's experiment with something. Instead of using floats and clears, why don't we use something called inline block, right? So whereby we have something called, if you have an emphasis or a strong element, say inside a paragraph, that piece of phrasing text sits and flows in line with the other words in that paragraph. It's flow content, right? Something that's display block forces a character return, right? It can't have words sitting on either side of it. It's like a header or a section, right? Or a block quote. It commands its own line on the screen, right? So in CSS, we have display block. We have display inline for flow content. We also have inline block. So it's kind of a hybrid. So you can kind of think of like, that's kind of like you have electric cars, you have gas-powered cars, and you have plug-in hybrid electric cars. That's the inline block, right? So it has all the features of the block, but you can sit them side by each, and they can sit on a line. So you could have a series of elements that all have all the box model controls, and they can sit like this happily on a baseline without forcing it. So they're inline in the sense they sit side by each like words, but they have all the box model controls, height, width, padding, all that kind of good stuff. Pretty cool. So let's investigate, instead of using floats and clears, why don't we try inline block for these two things and see how that changes our approach. Where are we going to go here? Wait, I've lost my spot. Sorry? 4.7, right. Inline block. Okay, so let's take out the floats. So let's comment out for the section. We'll comment out the float. We'll comment out the float for the main element. I'm not using them anymore. And we'll also comment out the float on the aside element. We don't need the clear anymore. We got rid of that because we set a float on the main to force the clear. So we don't need to worry. We can leave that commented out as well. Right? Now, okay, we have basically things are just rendering. They have the appropriate width, but they're rendering in a single column. That's fine. Okay, so that's where we should be at. So then, if we want to experiment with inline block, what we need to do is set each of these, the section and the aside, each one of those to behave as an inline block character. So in the section here, we use the display property inline block. We also, for the aside, also need so set display inline block on both the section and the aside columns. Now, this doesn't, what still happens now is you have, if these don't fit, much like words, when words wrap, they'll go to a new line. They're in line. They're now, these boxes are now flow content, if you can imagine that. So if that doesn't fit entirely up in here, it's doing exactly what you said. It's in line, but it doesn't fit for whatever reason. So now we have to go in and adjust our, something's not fitting. So let's just say our section element, or let's change the aside. Let's bring this down to, say, 295. Nope. 290. Ah, there we go. 290 seemed to fit the bill. And if you're confused about the math, let's take a look at the main element. Why is that not fitting? It's got 900 in there, and yet this section element, 550, and the side element, 550 plus the padding right is 600. And the aside element is 290. So something else is not, there must be something else that's forcing that combination of two boxes to be greater than 600. Maybe I'll look inside this 290. Maybe my figure element, no. Paragraph element, no. No. Fig caption element? No. I'm not exactly sure. Something in there, either something in this element or this element is not allowing us to fit into. I'm kind of stymied, to be honest. But anyway, here they sit side by each. Notice, though, this weirdness going on. It's not weird. It's in line, right? When you have a word, if you set, the same thing as with, it's doing exactly the same. For example, this image here is an example, it's a precise illustration of what's going on with these larger boxes. This image is an inline element. It's not a display block. It sits on the baseline like text. So this picture is just like a word in this sentence. It's sitting on the same baseline, so you've got this, this doesn't, yeah, you logically think, well, it would go up here. No, it won't unless you float this to the left inside the paragraph. This will sit on the same, it's in line, it sits on the baseline. The picture is like a letter. Same thing now with these two boxes. They may be different heights, but they sit on the same baseline. That might be helpful depending on your user interface that you're building. It might be, or it might be unhelpful. So what we can do is we can control the vertical line of these things. So what I can do is I can say to the aside, vertical line, top. And there we go. Look, Ma, no floats. Okay. Vertical line middle. You can set them both to vertical line. Oh, yes, middle of the baseline. So that will correspond directly with the middle of that element. Does that make any sense? Again, it depends on what you're doing. It's just doing exactly what you told it to do, right? And I've never quite been sure about bottom versus baseline. To me, they get the same result. So I've never quite wrapped my head around that one, but if you're using display inline block to arrange things achieve a column, then you want vertical line on perhaps on all of them, because maybe you don't know that the aside is going to be shorter than the section. So maybe set vertical line on both of them to top, right? Just to hedge your bet. Now, what this doesn't help you with, if there's a background color on this column that is different than this doesn't help you automatically extend the bottom of this column to the base of, so that they're the same height.
If I had to put the float right to the one on the right, what did I do wrong earlier? I had to give a side float right in order for it to go there where it should be.
Float right.
Yeah, what did I miss earlier?
I got rid of all the floats entirely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Floating stuff that's in. Ugh. Yeah, that's gonna be. You can create all kinds of fun for yourself. Those interactions will be very, very, should we say, unpredictable.
It's interesting because the editor says it's gonna be ignored, but it's not being
Yeah. Yeah, I think it depends on strategy. If you're going to use floats and clears, use floats and clears.
ignored.
If you're going to use inline block, use inline block, right? If you're going to use flexbox, use flexbox. And shortly,
It's bootstrap.
well, but Bootstrap uses this stuff too,
Yes.
right? So that's kind of like saying, well, why don't you just show me the Bootstrap classes? I can, but if something breaks, you don't know how to like crack open the hood and fix it.
Yeah.
Then you're really stuck. So you have to understand how a framework like Bootstrap, why, and then you appreciate how it makes your life so much easier. Because this is really hard. This is really, layout with CSS is so hard.
Yes.
Okay, and if any of you are going home going, I just totally don't get, this is nuts. It is nuts. That's why things like Bootstrap came along. Because people are like, this is insanity. You know, I want to have, I need 5 columns and 4 rows, and I need some of the columns to span different rows, and I have this really complex layout. How am I going to do that with floats and clears when there's all these moving parts and everything's breaking all the time? Yeah, it's hard. It's really difficult. And it takes a lot of practice, right? I've been at CSS for years, and I still wrangle with it. I should keep a swear jar in my office for the times I'm working with CSS. Because it's still, every now and then you're like, what is going on with this? This makes no sense. This helps though, setting the border box sizing rather than content box. This does help. It does make that a little bit more manageable. So I encourage you to consider that method of the border of box sizing. Okay, so that's cool. Let's save that for now. And I think that's the end of step 8. I believe. 8. I don't think there's no, there's no H. All right. No. So step 9, where did I go? What did I want to do with the step 9 here? Okay, absolute and fixed positioning. Okay, let's take a look. Let's step aside from the grid layout that we've kind of resolved more or less. And of course, we use pixels for grid. Please note, you could use percentages. You can swap those out for percentages. You can use points or M's, right? If you want to use sizes of things based on the font size, right? That's called elastic layout. So we could change all that. But I wanted to keep the math fairly simple, right? So all that can change. But just if you're mixing one with the other, it's like mixing oil and water. So if you're mixing pixels with M's, or you're mixing pixels with percentages, you're going to get some pretty strange kind of combinations, right? Which would be difficult to add up. So go one way or the other. So let's take a look at absolute and fixed positioning. So P class social, I'll close this. I forgot to add a brace at the end there, so just add that at line 80. So this is for in the markup. In the footer, we have a paragraph class social, and I've got FLGI. So these here these letters in this font. So what I'm going to do is the class social. So what we'll do is we'll let's uncomment this code here. Adding the font, this font family that I've used here, that will swap out those characters for the Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus logo, and what's the other one on there? Can't remember. LinkedIn. So those are actually rendered characters. Okay, so what else have I done? I boosted the font size so they're nice and big, so that they're easy to in a touch context. You want to make them easy for people to hit with their finger, right? You got to think about that. I set the background color of this element to slightly transparent with an RGBA alpha. So RGB black 000 red green blue 70% opacity. And I've set the height and width. I've added some padding. I've centered the text. Set it white. That's it. Okay. So let's have some fun with positioning this. So let's change this to, right now, this is position, the default is static. Okay, so if you set something position static, that means it's like flow content. It renders where it would be found in the source order. Okay. If I take this out of the page, right, I can do something like this. I can say position. I can say, well, let's leave it in the flow. Relative. If I say position relative, on its own, that will not do anything to this. But positioning something relative does a number of interesting things. One, if there's any children, if this element contains any children, they can now be positioned with respect to this rather than the viewport of the page. That's the first thing. You now set something called a positioning context. Number two, I can now offset this based on where it sits right now. So I can say, okay, now let's say from the left, let's go minus 25 px. I can move it left. I can add a positive value and bump it off to the right. So relative means position it relative to where it would otherwise be rendered in static. And now you have, from the top, I can say, oh, how about down 50 pixels? And down it goes. So now the interesting thing to note is that notice how this footer, this space, when something is positioned relative, it still reserves the space that it otherwise would have occupied when it was in static. So you're still leaving that space, right? When you position something absolute or fixed, so let's change this to absolute. When you change it to absolute, you in effect tear it out of that document flow, and that space that was reserved for it before then collapses. It has no reason. It's as if it doesn't exist. So if I now position this absolute, notice how the footer collapses. Because I guess it's left the building. Right? The P class social has actually picked up and left the building. It's removed from the document flow of the page. And now it's positioned from the top 50 down and from the left 25 pixels out. Now, let's set it from the top 0. And if you're using, it doesn't matter what units you're using. If you set 0, 0 is 0. You don't have to put 0 pixels or 0% or anything like that. It's just 0 is 0. So if I do this, I want you to see something. So I refresh the page. That should be 0 from the top. Why is it not? Let's go into the footer here. There's the P-class social. What's that orange stuff? Escaping margin. Strikes again. So it's rendering the margin at 1 EM.
Just set the margin
right? 1 EM is the margin default. 1 font size. The font size I've set to 60 pixels for that paragraph. So let's go into the paragraph element and globally set the margin to 0. And now we can make sense of this, right? There's our margin at 0, top, 0, bottom, right and left. Now it has a bit of padding. Notice how the width of the content is 230. And I've got 10 and 10 on the other side, so it's width 250. And that's because it is, so the width is 250. That's because it's border box sizing, not content box. That's inherited because we set that at the top. Okay? So that gets rid of that escaping margin situation. Okay, before we go into Z-index, we can also do, instead of absolute, or we can set this from the right. Let's go here. Let's say right 25 pixels. But notice how it still flows with the page. So the attachment is still to the content of the page. That's very important to understand with position absolute. The attachment of the element, though it's removed from the flow of the page, it's still attached to the content. So if I scroll the content up, it will move with the content, with the DOM. Okay? If I change it to position fixed behaves much like position absolute, but the attachment is different. Now it's attached to the viewport, not the content.
How do you do it? Right? Oh, fixed, okay.
Fixed.
What if we leave position absolute, put left 25 and then right 25? Shouldn't it be moved to the right?
No, it's from the right or from the left.
Yeah. But
Of the
first it's 25 from the left, and then it's get overridden by 25 from the right.
correct.
But
Yeah,
it
they will because the right will cascade over the left.
But it's not doing it. At least in my case.
So if I do left,
And then right below it. Yeah. So it's like,
you're right.
yeah. I don't quite understand why.
Maybe I can honestly say I've never noticed that before. I guess because very often you're either positioning it from the left of its nearest positioned ancestor or from the right of that element. So it's positioning, with position fixed, it's positioning from the left of the viewport or from the right of the viewport. But in this case, this seems to be, you're right, this seems to be winning the
Model.
yeah. The CSS might fail validation. I don't know. That's an interesting.
It shouldn't.
It shouldn't though, because there's nothing syntactically wrong with that. That's interesting. I've just never tried to position it from both the left and the right at the same time. I guess I kind of figured I'd break something. You can go from the bottom. I'll get rid of that. For now, I'll go from the bottom. Right? And it's still fixed. Right? Now the interesting thing is if I change that to the bottom as position absolute, right? It moves with the content. So it's positioned at the bottom, 0, of the viewport, at scrolling notwithstanding. It's a bit weird. It is. It's weird. So I'm going to put this up fixed, and I'm going to put it to the top. From the top, 0. You can also put in percentages. So you can say left 35%, from the top, 35%. So you can make it liquid to some degree. Things don't have to be positioned with fixed values. Let's set it from the right. And then I'm going to show you, first of all, let's fix this crazy, let's fix this escaping margin here on the H1. So what I'll do in here, and then we're just about done here. So let's go up to the header. So let's take a look at my markup. In the header, I have an H1. This is the element that is escaping. The margins are escaping, right? So I'll set the margin 0 on the H1, not on the header. It looks like the header is the culprit here, but it's actually the heading inside the H1 inside the header. So what I'll do is I'll go into I'll say header. And I'll put margin 0. That should take care of our escaping margin for the header. And now everything is as it should be. Or the universe has some sense of order, I guess. It's a bit of a stretch with CSS, but we'll say it anyway. Okay, so, yes?
On that selector in CSS, the red in each one. If I put a plus, I forgot the name.
Angle bracket?
Yeah. Put it there, it's the same thing.
It effectively is the same thing. What this means is any H1 element that is a direct descendant of a header. So if the H1, if there was a header, and inside the header there was a div, and then the H1 was in the div, no longer true. It must be directly descendant from. And this is often called DOM style selectors, using the direct descendant combinator. But you only use more complex selector types if it's necessary. So keep it simple. If it's not necessary to do that, then don't introduce additional complexity to your code. Because then it will become difficult to cascade or win the cascade war later on. If you have a more specific, you'll have to increase the specificity of the. It gets all bad from there, right? Keep it simple. Yeah, good question. Okay, so what if I wanted this header to sit on top of this? Yeah, sorry, question.
How would we put the social media inside the yellow box? And to make it floating, like just right and margin?
Yes. So what I could do is I could set a positioning context on the, right now it's positioned with respect to the viewport. Right here, position fixed, right? What I can do is I can position the main, no, this is the yellow box, right? I can do this. This on its own doesn't do anything unless I offset the position of that element, right? It's just now all I've done is formally position the div ID container. That won't help with a position fixed element. Position fixed is always with respect to the viewport. But what I could do is I could say to this now position absolute, and what this will do, it will look at each ancestor in the DOM node, and will go, so the P will go into, is the footer position? No. Is the div ID container position? Yes. Okay, so then plot these with respect to its next formally positioned ancestor. Now, this is positioned with respect to top of the yellow box and 25 pixels from the right of the yellow box, not the viewport.
I gotta go into this cover
No,
now.
that's quite all right. That's quite all right. Take a look at the today's lab.
Yes.
It's just extending a few tasks on this code.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Be careful out there. So I'm going to leave this fixed. Okay, so it's with respect to the viewport. What if I wanted, now this is, when you position something, if something is later in the source code order and you render it absolute, it goes on top of everything else, right? So the later they are, the higher they're stacked in what's called the z-index. If I want an earlier element to be stacked, like for example this header, I want this to go on top of this. Let's go to the header. Header. Layer position elements with z-index. What I can do is I can say to this header, let's put a background color on this. And we'll say light blue. So now I can see that this is indeed underneath this box here that's positioned, right? And not to worry, I'll release this code. I'll post this up on Blackboard if yours is lost or broken or something's not quite right.
Okay, just again.
Yeah.
Social media on inside the yellow box, but to make them float up and down like when it's fixed.
Fixed. So fixed is always with respect to viewport. So you can't attach something to an element in the DOM absolutely and have it stay on the page when you flow that up.
So,
it's a logical problem.
So basically merge and write, boom. Just shove it in there.
You mean change? Yeah, you could put it in the source. You could change the source order. Yes, that's one way to do it. And maybe that's the right. If that's what you're doing, like if those social links are in the header, maybe they should be in the source order up there, right? So sometimes that's the easiest answer is to change source order. Yeah, and then you could attach it there. Could you leave it? Yeah, then you could position that whole element, the header, fixed and let the content flow underneath it. Absolutely.
It's like a fixed navigation.
Like a fixed navigation bar. And we'll do that in this class. We'll teach you how to do those that kind of UI, those UI features. So not to worry about that. So, but what I do for the header here. So div ID header. Where do we go? Let's set the z-index, and we can set this to, even if I set it to 1. This is set to 1 because it's above 0 is ground 0. This is 1. So I might actually have to set it to something higher than that, maybe 2. Oh no, I have to position it. Position, and just set it to relative. Now that if something is positioned formally, you can change the stacking order, irrespective of the source order. Okay, so now this becomes, even though it's earlier in the source code than this, if I position it relative, which still sits where it should, unless I offset it, I can now change that vertical order. It's not real 3D. There actually is real 3D in the browser, and you guys will learn how to render things in truth. There is a Z-index, or there is a Z-axis. This is a Z-index, so it's a layering order, not true 3D. There is 3D with a Z-axis that can be worked. You can do that, but let's walk before we sprint. Okay, it's pretty cool actually. So there you go. So. But I wouldn't do this. If you've got lots of things that are being stacked, I wouldn't leave yourself tight. So what I might say is leave some spaces, like set this to, I think you can set the Z-index to some crazy value. Set it to 10. So if you want to put something underneath it, you still have 8 or 9 different places to stuff something in there, right? So then there you go. And I think there's one more thing I was going to do, control visibility and display properties. It's important, again, to understand, we've been using display a lot. There's also a visibility property. So if we look at the image element that's inside the paragraph in the main part of the page, which is this, right? This is set to display inline. That's the default for image elements. They are inline content. They're flow content. So if I set this to I can set this to visibility, and I can say hidden. If I do that, it still retains that space that the flow content would otherwise have taken up. It's just not rendered. Okay? That's different than doing this. If I set it to display none, it now actually takes it out of the flow of the page and removes it from the document flow. The end effect is the same in that you can't see it, even though it's still in your HTML, but this is display none means take it out of that flow. Visibility just controls whether or not it's like a toggle on or off. It's like a light bulb. This means actually take it, and then the paragraph reflows to fill in that space. Okay, that's cool. And that's it. So that is the basics. So next week we're gonna talk a little bit more about more complicated or more like things like the Holy Grail layout and other things that and different ways we can kind of make this a bit more reliable and more robust. But this is just a good, I think, a good primer on using things like display inline block, floats and clears, positioning, and all these kind of good things. You have to have a relatively good handle on these things. They're not great layout tools, but they're the layout tools we've had up until now. And a lot of software is built on these as layout tools today. So you have to understand it, but the future is very bright. It's actually, this layout stuff's actually going to get a lot easier. So if you're kind of like walking away going, layout's impossible with CSS, it's okay. It's going to get easier. It's going to get much more fun and much more powerful. So for today's lab, for homework, I want you to just kind of take the existing code, and if I'll post the existing my code right now. So if you've broken something that you can't quite track it down, you can take my code. And so what I want you to do is go ahead and restore the layout back to content box sizing, right? So get rid of this stuff at the top, and then try and make the layout work again with content box sizing. Okay, that's step one. Then I want you to have to try the section element float to the right of the aside. So move it back to the other side, right? Flip these around, okay? I want you to add a second section element, put some bogus text, and put it in between the two. Try and add a third column. You'll have to adjust the widths of things, right? Increase the space around the text inside both section elements. So add some more gutter for the text. You can without causing the aside to break. So I want to have them three in a lot. You can use floats or you can use inline block, whatever you want. Set the footer element to sit fixed at the bottom of the page with a black or dark background so the footer sits and you can scroll the stuff and the footer just sits there. So try putting the footer, bolting it to the bottom of the viewport and letting the content scroll by. Okay? Tidy up any unused CSS, right? Clean up your code, validate your CSS, and add any comments that you see fit. Okay? Go for it. That's cool. So project here, project 1, let me quickly introduce to you project 1. What I've got here is a series of print layouts. So I'm going to give you the layout, and I'm also going to give you the HTML. So don't start this right away when you leave class. I'm going to provide you with the layout. In the past, I've had people actually construct the HTML yourself. There are a number of different magazine layouts, one-page spreads, and I'm going to give you the HTML, and I want you to build the CSS and try and make your page look exactly like the layout on the Market magazine spread. Exactly. As close as you can. It won't be exact, but try and get as close as you can. Try and figure out what the fonts are. Try and figure out those colors, right? Try and approximate those. Look at layout. Can you get a grid, sort of a layout that sort of approximates what they've done? Get those relative font sizes, line heights, adjust the leading. Do your very best. It's not going to look identical, but see how close you can get. Okay, so wait a little bit. I'm going to craft up some HTML. So you don't have to do the HTML. I just want you to do the CSS for this assignment or this project. So stay tuned. I'll send you a note about this when this HTML is done, and then you can start chipping away at this project here. Okay, cool. Please be safe out there. If you're driving, please be careful. I don't know, the roads are going to start to ice up pretty quick. So please use caution, take your time. Okay, it's not worth an accident. Okay, thanks for coming out. Sorry for the having to do the survey this morning, but it's very helpful. Oh, you're very welcome. Good, thank you. Yeah, peer tutoring. I just assumed it was tutoring for people in this class.
Yeah, not this time. I mean, maybe all the course. I'm thinking about more like programming, HTML.
Yeah, for the programmers.
And then programmer.
Yeah. So if you just actually, if you have it, I can list the other courses that you might be appropriate for. Because we do have students that might benefit from your help. Hang on, I'm just going to stop my recording here.
I don't know how.